So I was talking to a friend of mine recently. My friend works at a high-end car shop where they do car repairs. And so one day he had just picked up for himself a newer car, not brand new, but really nice car. My friend is into cars. So he had a nice car, and he had the key sitting on his desk that day as he was running the front desk for the shop, and a customer came in, and he had wanted some work done on his vehicle. And so my friend was interacting with him and taking care of everything, and then the customer left, and my friend started looking around and was like, where's my car keys? Can't find my car keys anywhere. And so he's like, he couldn't find them. He knew they were just right there. So the office has security cameras set up. So he turned on the security cameras and replayed it and watched the customer that had just been in. He watched on camera as that guy, the moment my friend turned his back, reached over, took the car keys, put them in his back pocket. The customer obviously didn't know there were cameras watching his every move. So my friend sees this, and this customer is just giving him all his contact information, phone number, address, emergency contact, everything. So he calls and calls and calls. The guy won't pick up the phone. So finally he calls the emergency contact. It turns out to be this customer's mom. And my friend says to the mom, your son was just in here, and he stole my car keys. He has 15 minutes to get back or I'm calling the police. And she's like, oh, I'll call him right away. And 1 minute later, my friend's phone goes off. And he's like, how come you're calling my mom accusing me of stealing your car keys? Who do you think you are? I can't believe it. And my friend just remained perfectly calm. He's really good in situations like this. He's like, sir, you took my car keys. You have 15 minutes to get back here and give me my car keys or I'm calling the police. Oh, I didn't steal your car keys. And he hangs up. So 5 minutes later, the guy comes back in. And he's mad. He's just livid. How dare you accuse me? How dare you call my mom, tell me I stole your car keys? And my friend said, well, they're in your pocket right now. And the guy says, no, they're not. And he pulls out his front pockets, empties them out. And my friend never tells him that it's all recorded. He says, they're in your back pocket. And he goes like this. He's like, oh, how'd those get in there? I must have picked them up by mistake. And he puts the car keys down. My friend says, thank you, you're banned for life. Don't ever come back. Now, I wish I could tell you that was an uncommon thing that happens in our world, right? But all of you know that stories like that are very common now. We're doing this whole series on character, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of character and integrity in our world right now, right? Many of you have been hurt by people who violated their integrity when it came to you and the way they treated you. And in the middle of this world, with so much lack of character and criticism and cruelty that goes on, here I am talking for a couple of weeks about you need to be positive. And I know that there's a little bit of resistance, like, what, are you kidding me? Brian, you have no idea the jerks I'm going to have to go and spend 40 hours with starting tomorrow. You have no idea how rude these people are, how cruel these people are, how selfish these people are, and you want me to be positive? Or, Brian, you don't know what I'm living through right now. You don't know the news I just got this last week. You don't know the things I've been dealing with this year. You don't know. And now you're telling me to be positive. And for many people, this message seems impossible in light of what we're all living through. And for some of you, that's how you feel today. It's like, I don't think I can be positive in light of everything that's going on in my life. So this is essential. It is an essential part of your character, and what I want you to know is that not only is it possible, it is really important for you. It's not only possible to be positive in the middle of all of this, because your positivity is not dependent upon your circumstances. It is not dependent upon what's happening on the outside of your life right now, and I can show you that in what we're going to talk about today. Your positivity depends upon what you allow to happen here in your mind. And guess who's the landlord of your thoughts? You. You're the landlord. You only allow in what you want in. And you have that power whether you realize it or not. And if you learn what we're talking about last week and this week, you can change your life. So I want to show you that as we finish our series today. We've been in this for a little while now. We're finishing a series called Character Matters. And I want to talk about part 2 of what we started talking about last week. Welcome to those of you who are watching online. Love the comments. I met someone yesterday who was watching our YouTube channel. So love to meet you people and hear from you. So thanks so much for watching. I want to ask you to grab your notes for those of you watching online at our website or on our YouTube channel. You can follow along on your notes. And welcome, of course, to those of you here. You can grab your notes as well. Let's jump right into this. By the way, if you missed part 1 last week, it's online. So you can go to YouTube, look up my name, or you can go on our website and watch part 1. And I'm not redoing last week's message, and there was a lot that we covered. So we started talking about this. When you find yourself negative, one of the things you have to understand is you have the power to hit the reset button on your brain. You have the power to hit the reset button on your brain. We started talking about this last week. And so we're going to continue on your notes, jump down to letter B. This is where we're starting. Obviously, the reset button on your brain really will always include practicing daily gratitude. Practicing daily gratitude. Now, I have talked about gratitude 3 times since COVID started. This is the 3rd time. I'm not done talking about it. I'm going to keep talking about this until we all really internalize the truth of this. Because gratitude is a superpower in your life. This is dopamine. I've talked about this many times. Dopamine is one of the positive neurotransmitters in your brain. It is the happy juice of your brain. Want happy juice in your brain? Gratitude triggers dopamine, and your brain just loves that dopamine. It loves it. If you want happy juices in your brain, you want your brain to be happy, then that's going to come from dopamine, and we know scientifically that dopamine is triggered by gratitude. When you are grateful, your brain produces dopamine. When we're grateful, your brain produces dopamine. And then dopamine begins to have all of these positive effects in your life. Not only does it make your brain happy, it also turns on the learning centers of your brain. It makes you smarter, it makes you able to process information better. Now, the good thing about this, and one of the most important things I'm going to teach you today, and I'm going to rehash this, I'm going to bring this back up again. Your brain can only focus on, give its full attention to one thing at a time, right? You know this. I mean, in the cell phone world we live in right now, you've learned this more than any. Just watch people having a conversation, talking when they're typing on their phone. Do you feel like they're giving you their attention? You feel really connected to them? Of course not. You can only really focus on one thing at a time, and I want to show this to you. So I'm going to put something up on the screen here in just a moment. I'm going to ask you to read the words on the screen while I read this verse. Okay? So I'm going to ask you to pay attention to both. A little quiz afterwards, see how good you do, okay? So I'm going to ask you to read through the words on the screen while I read these words from the Bible. So take a look at that. So get started. Okay, so the Bible says in Psalm 50:14, make thankfulness your sacrifice to God, and keep reading, and keep the vows you made to the Most High. Then keep reading, make sure you're getting through that. And then call on me when you're in trouble, and I'll rescue you. Keep reading, and you will give me glory, and giving thanks is a sacrifice that truly honors me. Okay. Is that how your brain feels? If I were to ask you, what verse did I quote? Right? Your brain, do you get it? Your brain gets one focus. One. And if I ask you, if I put words up there and I start reading, you're not going to be able to give full attention to both, right? Do you see how hard that is? Some of you don't even know what you read because you were trying to do both. You ever done that? You read something, you're like, I have no idea what I just read. So your brain is somewhere else. Your brain can only give full attention to one thing. This is great news. This is great news because you determine where you're going to focus the energy and attention of your brain. You determine that. And if you focus the attention of your brain on gratitude, your brain starts to get healthier. Your brain starts to get healthier. And you get to choose where your brain is going to focus. You get to choose that. Your brain starts to really get well fed when you're grateful. So some of you, again, I know, they're really skeptical. Some of you are really skeptical about this whole subject. You're like, Brian, but you don't know what I'm living through. You don't know how hard things are right now. You don't know what I've been through. How can you tell me that I get to be grateful and positive in the middle of this? Let me show you an example from the Bible that will help you, I think, understand this a little better. So there's this great verse in the book of Philippians, and the writer is a man named Paul. Here's what he said. Paul said, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. That would be a good thing to hang up in most people's homes, right? We need to stop worrying and we need to start praying. But then he says more. He says, here's what you do. You tell God what you need and then you thank him for all he's done. So when you're tempted to worry about something, many of you came in here today with things that you're worried about, right? Is there anything you're worried about in your life right now? Worried about your kids? Worried about something at your job, worried about your finances, worried about your future, worried about your career, right? All of us have things in our lives that we brought in here where we're worried about. And he says, I don't want you to worry. God doesn't want you to worry. It's pointless. It does no good. He says, instead, I want you to turn it into prayer, and I want you to do two things. He says, first, I want you to tell God what you need. Do you know why he says that? Because God is the greatest Father. And every great father loves to meet the needs of his kids. Loves it, loves it, loves it, loves it. He's the greatest father you've ever had. And your needs matter to him. And when you tell him what you need, he loves to meet your needs to show you how much he loves you. So he says, first, tell him what you need. And then notice, he doesn't just say, tell him what you need. What does he say after that? Thank him for all he's done. So he says, attached to your prayers should always be gratitude. It's like he says, I want you to wire into your brain gratitude. Anytime you're talking to God, you can ask and thank him. Ask and thank him. Ask and thank him. Wire gratitude in. Now, for those of you who are skeptical, saying, Brian, you don't know what I'm living through? You can't believe what I'm going through right now. There's no way I can be grateful in the middle of these circumstances. Let me tell you a little bit about the background of this verse. Paul, the person who wrote that verse, was here in a Roman jail. This is where he was when he wrote that verse. He was sitting in a prison cell. The only light for him probably was just a flickering torch down the hallway. He had only the clothes that he had on that he wore every single day. Maybe he had some of his scrolls if his friends or people that cared about him were able to get to him and give him scrolls. It depended on the jailer and depended on the jail. He would get a little scrap of food every day to eat. They wouldn't be taken out to the yard. There was no cable. There was no bathrooms. The sounds that he would hear every day were the sounds of his fellow prisoners moaning and crying from the beatings that they'd endured at the hands of the Romans. And at any minute, the jail cell could open and the Romans could take him out to be executed. And here he is. Can you picture him in the corner of this cell, getting down on his knees every day and thanking him for all he has done? Now tell me again why you can't be thankful in your circumstances. We can all be thankful. And we take so much for granted here in America. The wealthiest nation the world has ever even dreamed of. We have so much to thank him for. So here's the thing about this. It's not that you don't know that this is important in your life. I've taught on this many times. I hear people respond to this one. So here's how habits are formed in your life. Do you know this? There's 3 pieces to every habit in your life. Gratitude is a habit you have to start. There's a trigger, then there's the routine, and then there's a reward. So in this case, the routine is actually thanking God. Getting on your knees and thanking God every single day. That's the behavior we want to create, right? So that's the routine. The reward is dopamine and all kinds of other positive effects in your life. Your life is better when you're grateful than when you're not, right? I mean, all of you, none of you are like, oh no, if only I complained more, my life would be so much better, right? None of you are saying that. You know that gratitude's the way to go. So the only thing is, what's your trigger? What's your trigger? What's going to remind you that you need to be grateful tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day? I became a Christian when I was in high school. My mom, who became a Christian right at the same time as I did, was just full of wonderful little things that she taught me. And so one time she said to me, Brian, why don't you try this? Before you go to bed every night, why don't you just close your eyes, and as you're falling asleep, just spend a little time thanking God before you fall asleep. And so I'm like, okay. And so I had a trigger from my high school years. And the trigger was, as I was falling asleep, as I was laying in bed at night, I would say to God, you know what, God, here's what I'm thankful for. And I would just spend time every day as I was falling asleep thanking God. Now I have a new trigger. In my prayer journal, every morning when I get up early to pray, I get down on my knees and I have the phrase, 10 things, and I know what it means to me. When I see that phrase, in my prayer time, I stop and I think through the last 24 hours and I thank God for 10 things from the last 24 hours. It's never hard. I never get stumped. I never run out. I never get to 7 and go, I guess I got nothing else. And you train your brain to be positive. And you flood your brain with dopamine, and you rewire your brain. You remember, we hit that reset button? Now you're resetting your button. What's going to be your trigger? What's your trigger? What will you put into your life that's going to remind you that this is really important for you to do? Now, the only other thing we're really going to talk about today is this one. The other thing that really impacted me as I was prepping this message was this one. This really impacted me. One of the things we have to learn to do is reframe our pain. Because I'm not denying that you have painful things happening. Please hear me saying that. I'm not saying painful things don't happen to you as Christians. Paul was in a prison cell. He'd been beaten. He'd been starved. He'd had all his possessions confiscated. It's not like, oh, if I'm a Christian, everything goes great. No, but even in the middle of that, our circumstances don't determine our positivity. What goes on in our head determines that. And so what I learned about this really impacted my life. So as I was prepping this message over the last couple of weeks, I came across a really kind of cool word. You've all heard it at some point in your life, but it's really kind of fun. It's the word ruminate. Not just kind of a fun word, ruminate. So, and I was reading about ruminating, and it got me contemplating, and I started thinking about how it's impacting this whole subject of whether I have positive thoughts or negative thoughts. And one of the things I was reading that was so interesting, well, let me show you this first. Actually, back up. So the author said this. He was talking about gratitude. He said, gratitude shifts our inner attention away from such negative emotions as resentment or envy. By the way, is resentment in your head today? Or has it been in your head this week? Is there someone you're angry with and bitter toward? Have you been ruminating about that person and what they said to you and what they did to you? Ever have a boss treat you really bad, or a coworker stab you in the back, or a friend do that to you? Did you ruminate? Right? He said, so gratitude shifts our attention away from things like resentment, anger, bitterness, envy. And it says it minimizes the possibility of ruminating. And then he said this, ruminating is a hallmark of depression. And I read that sentence, and so I'm like, oh my goodness. Are we as a nation dealing with any mental health issues right now? Right? Oh my goodness. We are the most medicated society in the history of the world. We can't create drugs fast enough. We are depressed, anxious, stressed out beyond belief. These are just facts. I'm not exaggerating this. This is our world right now. And depression is a huge issue, right? Especially in light of COVID. The amount of people struggling with mental illness today is overwhelming. And when I read that sentence, it really struck me because he said, one of the things that is a trigger for depression is ruminating. Ruminating is when you allow something to go over in your mind repeatedly. Again and again, you replay the negative. You replay the negative. For some of you, it's not that picture, it's this picture. Ruminating about something negative in your mind. And you let it go over and over and over in your mind. But this is the right image, right? You feel a little crazy because you can't stop thinking about it, and you ruminate and you ruminate and you ruminate. And it takes over, and you're literally you're bathing your brain in negative. Some of you, this describes your past week. Some of you, this describes the last 2 years of your life. You have been ruminating about things that are not right and things that have gone wrong and people that have hurt you and people that have betrayed you and people that have abandoned you and people who have rejected you, and you have this constantly in your mind. And there it is only, as the image shows, damaging to you. It certainly takes you down a path of negative thoughts, right? You're not positive when you're doing that, are you? You're negative. It's damaging to your health, it's damaging to your mental health, it's damaging to your relationships. And the way to break out is what we just talked about. It's first off gratitude. You make your brain go and ruminate about something positive. By the way, ruminating doesn't have to be negative. You can ruminate about something positive. You can make yourself think about a positive thing that happened in your life. But then the other thing is this one, and this was brand new to me. You reframe your pain. You reframe your pain. So what does it mean to reframe your pain? I want to ask you to consider whether or not you believe this verse. Do you believe, according to Ephesians 1:11, that God makes everything work out according to his plan? Do you believe that? Do you believe that everything that's happened in your life, our God is capable of making fit into his plan for your life? Do you believe that? Some of you are like, Brian, do you know what's happened in my life? You know what I've lived through? Romans 8 makes it even more direct than that. It says, we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love him. Do you believe that? Do you believe that even the painful things you've suffered to this point in your life, that our God is so great and so powerful and so wise that he can bring those around somehow and make them fit into his plan for your life in your future? Do you believe that? Some of you struggle with that. I read the story this last week of a guy named Alfred. He was born in inner city poverty in Los Angeles. Never knew his dad, grew up on the streets, got into gangs, got into meth, really got messed up, lived a life of violence and crime and theft just to try and get enough money to get the next hit. He knew that his future was either prison or death, right? One day he was so hungry he had no resources, everything went to the drugs, and he heard about this church in the area, and the church offered this free food bank where you could just come if you were hungry and get a meal. And so out of desperation, for the first time in his life, he went into a church. And he heard he didn't just get food for his body, they talked to him about this God of love, which just seemed so foreign to a man who'd grown up in that environment. Well, he was just kind of curious, and so he went back for more food, right? But to hear again and again and again. And the day came where he understood the message of Christianity, the message of hope for all people, that no matter where you've come from and what you've done and how long you've done it, and our God loved you enough and is so full of grace and kindness that he gave his only son to die for us. And if you will put your faith in him, he will rescue you. And this man who'd grown up in all that violence and crime put his faith in Jesus Christ. And he began to be what the Bible says later in Ephesians, a new creation. He began to be a new creation. And then God did something amazing. God began to put on his heart the responsibility to go back into the place where he had just escaped from and start showing love to drug dealers and people who were addicted to drugs and to gang leaders, the place where he had just come from, and now God has brought this full circle. God is so great that even when terrible things are done to you, he is so powerful, he can bring that around and bring good out of it and use it for his purposes in this world. So do you believe that? Oh, he can do it for a guy like that, but can he do it for you? Is this promise true for you? That he can bring good out of anything, out of the pain that you've experienced to this point in your life? Well, if it's true, and I believe it's true, but it's one thing to say that it's true, and it's another thing to act upon that truth. This is where it gets really hard. Then what you need to do is, those painful things that we ruminate about, that we think about over and over again, those betrayal moments in your life, those awful moments of things that have really hurt you that you've carried in here today, you've got a frame around them right now. And the frame for most of you says painful, unnecessary, unwanted. You've labeled it in some way and you keep a frame around it. But that's not the frame that God wants you to put around that. He wants you to put a different frame around that situation. He wants you to get rid of that frame, put a new frame up that says hope. and purpose and meaning. And to rethink through those painful things and think of it in light of what God has promised you. And so what it really means practically, what this specifically means, is that you look back on those things that have hurt you the most and you force yourself to find one good thing that came from that. Because if his promise is true, right, that he can bring good out of anything, then you start to look for how God is going to bring good out of the worst things in your life. So, timing of this was incredible, because I got really hurt again by a man who's hurt me a lot in my life. And it was a few weeks ago, and I was, it's so ironic how God puts these things in my life as I'm teaching. I mean, it's kind of how he does. I've said for years, I want to preach on how to handle winning the lottery. So that way he can, it's like, let me win the lottery, and then I can, right. So I was ruminating. I didn't even know it. I was ruminating about that. I didn't even see what had been done, but I could see it here. I saw it in my mind over and over again. I'd see it in my car, or when I was driving to get groceries. I'd see it in my bedroom when I was just waking up in the morning. I saw it and I replayed it and I replayed it. And then you ever have this? You ever get so mad at somebody that's not even with you that you start yelling at them or having invisible conversations with them because you're so angry at them? And I was so mad and so hurt, and I had it in this frame. And this frame said meaningless, pointless, painful, no purpose. And then I read this and I realized, I'm ruminating. I'm just replaying that again and again and again for no purpose, as if God isn't God, as if he hasn't made a promise to me that he can bring good out of this. And so I took that frame off and I put a new frame on that said purposeful and meaningful, and God will bring good from this. And then I made myself say, what's one good thing that's come from this? And I had nothing for days. For days, I couldn't come up with one good thing. But if God is God and his promise is true, then I knew there had to be something. And after days and days and days of ruminating positively about this, I finally came up with one. And then the interesting thing happened is, then I came up with another one. And I started seeing how God could fulfill his promise in something this painful, that he could bring good out of this. And then, once you've trained your brain to look for the good that God has promised, even in the middle of these awful things, then something dramatic really happens. He changes the whole image of that in the frame. So yesterday, I was in my car, I was driving somewhere, and I started ruminating. The scene popped in my mind, I started thinking about it, and then, because I'd already done this for the last 2 weeks, I immediately started saying, and what do I have to be grateful for in the middle of this? Because I had a new frame on it now. What can I be grateful for? And immediately, those two things that I was grateful for popped into my mind, and I just started thanking God, and I started looking, is there anything else, God, that you might be doing in this that I may not even be paying attention to? It was dramatic. I didn't realize till this morning when I woke up and I started rehearsing this, that what took place after that was completely, that was gone for the rest of the day. Never thought about it again. No negative. Instead, this awful thing became something where I was looking for the activity of God, and then it was gone from my mind. Remember, your brain can only focus on one thing at a time, right? And if you force your brain to reframe those painful things by looking for the promise of God in the middle of your painful moments, it will do that. It will go where you make it go. And then you get God's peace and God's joy and God's healing in those moments that normally, I don't know how long I'd have ruminated about that. But then God brings his healing into those moments. So I know this is hard. Please, if you didn't hear that from my story, I know how hard this is. I know it. I went days and I couldn't find one good thing. And by the way, don't tell this to anybody, okay? You can give them the link, let them watch the message, but if somebody's in pain, don't go, why don't you sit down and tell me one good thing that's come from this, okay? They will punch you, and deservedly so. So they got to learn this. So you can give them the link to this and let them watch this, but it's really, or you can say it when they're not in pain. You can say it then, but if they're really hurting, that's not what they need to hear from you. Be careful about this. But here's what I want you to know. Positive makes your life better, and positive is your choice. Positive is your choice. No circumstance can control positive. Paul could sit in a prison cell with nothing in the face of execution and be positive. You're not in a prison cell. You're way above that. So if he can do it there, we can do it here, right? Positive makes your life better. You get to choose. And God's promise is the basis for always being positive. Because I can take that old frame off anytime I want, and I can put his new frame around it. I choose that. That other person who meant that to hurt me, they don't choose. I'm the landlord here. And they may hurt me, but they don't get to have the final say around it. God's promise does. So here's what I'm asking you to do. 2 things. Find your trigger. What's your trigger going to be grateful? What's your trigger? Is it an app on your phone that you're going to put in there? Is it something you're going to hang on your fridge or your bathroom mirror in the morning so you see it every day? Is it something, some people are like, on my way to work, if you have a long commute, when I get to this place, I'm going to turn off the radio and I'm going to spend 2 miles just being grateful to God. You can pick anything as your trigger, but you won't just accidentally be more grateful, right? You're not just going to wake up for the next few months and just, oh my goodness, every day I'm just more grateful. No, you're not. You have if you don't put the trigger in, it won't just happen. What's your trigger going to be? You pick. And the other thing is, for those of you who know, you can really relate to that ruminating story. You've been ruminating about something painful in your life. I really want you to think about what you can do. Force your mind to take the old frame off and put a new frame on that says purpose and meaning. And in light of what God has promised you, ask this question: what good thing might God possibly be bringing out of this bad thing? And then you can talk to him about that, by the way. You can say, would you show me? Because he will. He is a great God who loves you. And don't expect that to be an instant healing thing, but I'm telling you, once you really get it reframed, the healing is powerful. It's powerful healing. Let me have you all bow your heads as we finish today. For some of you here today or watching online, you hear me talk about this personal God in a way that he is. That's the right, this God as if he was personal, and I'm communicating that intentionally. He is a personal God. He is crazy in love with you. He's crazy in love with you. He wants so badly to have you and his family that he wouldn't even withhold his own. The only way to make that happen, he sent his son Jesus to die on a cross for all of us, so that we could be completely forgiven. And we could get adopted into his family and be made new creations on the inside as the outside is still being cleaned up. And he just loves you so badly. He wants to be in relationship with you so much that if you'll just let him, he will come and make his home inside and forgive you and come and make things new inside of you. So if you want this, with your head bowed and your eyes closed, it's a step of faith. You have to ask for it. And you say something like this in your heart to him, say, Jesus, I want this new relationship with you. I really want a real relationship with you, God. I know I'm far from perfect, but I've heard that Jesus died for that. Would you please forgive me? Come make your home inside of me today. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish up today, can I ask all of you here just to take your connection card out of your program and just take a moment to fill it out. Even if you're a regular attender, just take a moment to fill this out. If you prayed and asked for his gift of forgiveness or renewed your commitment, just let us know. Here's a box you can check. And then if you want us to pray about something, some of you need some help reframing, you want us to pray for you, put it down here. We'll pray for you as a church. Then just drop this in one of the offering boxes on the doors. If you're watching online, if you go to our website at PennyOldChurchLife.com, we have a box in the upper right-hand corner that says, I said yes to Jesus. So you can check that box. And if you let us know what you've done, we'll send you some follow-up stuff in the mail as our way of saying thanks so much for letting us know.